What up, humans? Welcome to Story Kitchen. I'm Alora Scott, the Storytelling Saiyan. So I've seen some discussions on characters who get unnecessary hate. Skylar from Breaking Bad, Katara, my daughter, my mother, my sister, and my confidant from Avatar: The Last Airbender, Gabby from Attack on Titan, just to name a few. Did y'all notice something similar about them? They're all strong, they're all flawed, and they're all female. Now that isn't to say that male characters don't get hate or they're not developed to be flawed, but in fandoms, it seems that fully fleshed out female characters receive a level of vitriol that often gets forgiven, justified, and overlooked in male characters who make just as many mistakes. And I can't think of a better character on the receiving end of this kind of gender-based hatred than Daenerys Targaryen and her ancestor Rhaenyra Targaryen from the A Song of Ice and Fire series. Now, to be clear, other women characters from that universe, Catelyn, Arianne, Cersei, Sansa, Arya, and many other women characters get their fair share of hate. But none of these characters are as despised for being female as much as Rhaenyra and Daenerys are. The reason? These two dragons had the nerve to want to be queens in a world that doesn't allow women to have power, and the fandom cannot handle it. Let's cook. Before we get into it, for your reading and visual pleasure, my erotic graphic novel Deliberate is available now as both ebook and paperback at alorascott.com. Art and storytelling is my passion. I don't use AI, and all of my creativity is original. If Deliberate is a little too spicy for you, but you'd love to support my story analysis while I work on my next book, please like this video, leave a comment or an emoji, and subscribe for more. The Queens. So Rhaenyra and Daenerys are unfairly misjudged and maligned by the Asoya fandom. Granted, they are the most popular characters in their respective timeline of the series, and the main characters of the series, Daenerys especially. But with the disastrous, sexist ending of Game of Thrones, and the insulting, sexist character warping in House of the Dragon, the Asoya fandom has more ammunition to eagerly tear these women characters down to the pubic hair. Even though Rhaenyra and Daenerys are completely fucking different, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. We have Rhaenyra, who comes from a time where her family is at the height of its wealth and power, with the most dragons on the planet since the Doom of Valyria, contrasted with Daenerys, whose family is on the verge of extinction. She and her brother Viserys are penniless exiles, starving and stalked by assassins. And dragons, at this point, have been extinct for over 100 years. And yet, because they are women, both Daenerys and Rhaenyra are treated with equal suspicion, double standards, and demonization from both the fandom and the show writers. And there's a reason why. Rhaenyra and Daenerys are revolutionary women who break the status quo of the Asoya universe on the largest scale. And you can say whatever you want. George R. Martin created both Daenerys and Rhaenyra to challenge the oppressive systems that structure the Asoya world building. For Rhaenyra, George R. Martin used her story to shine a spotlight on society's attitudes towards women in positions of extreme power who also exercise their personal freedom. Rhaenyra was the first female heir and queen of Westeros. She owned her sexuality in a culture that treats women like walking uteruses. And when her crown was usurped by her brother, she had the nerve to fight back for what was legally hers. With Daenerys, she challenges everything. She changes everything. She had the nerve to survive being in impoverished exile, always being chased by Robert Baratheon's assassins. She had the nerve to survive her abusive brother Viserys. And she had the nerve to survive and find safety in being sold into bridal slavery as a child. After Mary Mazdor tried to kill her by forcing her to stillbirth her son Rhaegal, Daenerys went on to hatch dragons back into existence and now she's in the process of destroying the slave trade that powers the entire economy of the eastern continent of Essos. The others, or the White Walkers, parallel the slavers of Essos, so Daenerys' story is very much building toward her clashing with them in an epic fantasy adventure with her dragons as her heroic weapon. Protagonist. Icon. So we got these two queens from very different backgrounds whose lives are going in very different trajectories. Their existence in the story is a net positive for their respective timelines and for the other characters in their orbit. And yet, they are reviled for the best parts of themselves and for making very human mistakes. Rhaenyra. So, Rhaenyra gets a lot of shit from the fandom. The show House of the Dragon did not help at all. But I want to look at a few common criticisms that I see a lot against her. Spoilers for the Dance of the Dragons. Number 1. Rhaenyra was a spoiled brat because she didn't have sex or have children with her gay husband Laenor Velaryon. Number 2. Her being queen was not inherently feminist because she was a monarch. And number 3. When she actually did sit on the throne, she was a bad ruler. So let's cover the first criticism by looking at this tweet. Daily reminder that Jace was born the same year Rhaenyra and Laenor got married, which means they tried to conceive for a grand total of 7 weeks before throwing in the towel. Rhaenyra wanted to be heir, but then skipped every part of that role which requires actual effort. I see a lot of fucking tweets just like this, or tweets where people say, well, gay men can have children, they weren't trying. This thought process is so fucking stupid, disgusting, and harmful. People like this hate Rhaenyra so bad that they think she would have been better off if she just ignored her husband's sexuality, forced sex on him that neither of them want or would enjoy for a biological child. Then she would have the right to her inheritance, right? According to them. With the marriage between Rhaenyra and Laenor, George R. R. Martin was highlighting the inherent bigotry of Westerosi society. Rhaenyra's forced marriage to her cousin was a direct violation of their consent, their bodily autonomy, and their right to be queer. And that message went right over the fandom's heads. Instead, they agree that no, Laenor doesn't have the right to be gay. And also conversely, they're agreeing that gay people don't deserve to be in power. The fans agree that no, Rhaenyra should not have had sex with a man who shared her sexuality and was actually attracted to her. The show didn't help at all by making Alicent a child wife slave either. Now you got the fandom saying, well, Rhaenyra had a choice when Alicent didn't. Honey, hi. No one should be forced to have sex or have children against their will. Next point. This person said, a woman gaining power and upholding the same exact traditions as the men before her is not inherently progressive. Okay, so if it wasn't inherently progressive to the Westerosi politics, why was Rhaenyra usurped? Why did George R. R. Martin quote characters like Boris Baratheon and Alicent Hightower saying son's rights come before a daughter? If it wasn't inherently progressive, why did George R. R. Martin create so many women characters who fought for Rhaenyra? Alysanne Blackwood, Nettles, Baela Targaryen, Sabitha Frey, her auntie cousin Rhaenys, who was also denied the throne because she was a woman. And don't forget Rhaenyra's diva cousin Jane Eyre and her famous quote, in this world of men, us women must band together. Funnily enough, she was also usurped by a male relative, unsuccessfully. I have an even better question. Why do these people in the fandom expect Rhaenyra to not only be the very first queen of her continent, but also to smash the same monarchy and feudal system that she was raised in? Why is it that all of a sudden, when a woman becomes queen, monarchy bad? People are not saying this because they truly think kings and queens and lords in this story are bad, because they never have that smoke for the men who have occupied these same positions of power for the length of this story's entire history. They never have criticism for the Starks, or the Lannisters, or the Hightowers for leeching their wealth off the common people. They literally don't even have criticism for Aegon, Rhaenyra's usurper brother, who is a monarch just like her. It's only Rhaenyra who is supposed to execute more change to the only political system that she knows. It's Rhaenyra who has to undo her own culture. Even though if she did renounce monarchy and feudalism, all the lords in the land would want her dead. Nope. These fans really think that being the first person to break through what is essentially a glass ceiling is not enough. And we absolutely know why. And this brings me to the last criticism that these so-called fans have about Rhaenyra. This person said, "We literally see her rule for 6 months and absolutely nothing changed. She literally tells women, rules for thee, but not for me. Puts tax on bastards. She doesn't put any tax reforms, apart from tax the fuck out if the small folk. We see her rule. She sucked at it." Yes, you know what? Not only should Rhaenyra have renounced monarchy, she should have turned Westeros into a socialist democratic utopia during the 6 months that she sat on the throne, while a war was being waged in her name. Duh! Because when Rhaenyra did sit on the throne, it was literally in the middle of the war. You know, an expensive war, where she needed to keep her soldiers fed and armored to keep fighting for her. You know, the war where her brother had stolen all the money from the royal treasury so he could use it against her. You know, the same war where she'd lost most of her children, had been betrayed by 2 of her dragon riders, so she didn't know who to trust. The war that was started against her only because she was born a woman. So it would have been unwise to give seats of power to the other women when there were powerful men fighting for her. You're gonna see this a lot. Not only are these criticisms fucking dumb and bigoted, they completely ignore the context that leads up to the decisions that both Rhaenyra and Daenerys make. Speaking of Daenerys, the queen gets so much fucking hate, but that's how you know she's the queen. Now, I'm not even gonna fucking talk about that piece of shit show where they made Dany go mad out of nowhere. Nobody who reads the books, or who isn't a raging brainless misogynist, believes in that ending. Shout out to PhoenixAshes. They break down how the show did not foreshadow Daenerys' madness until the very last minute. Highly recommend. In the books, Daenerys has objectively accomplished the most good out of all the other characters. She is the best ruler. She is a slave abolitionist, and she puts the justice and rights of her people before herself.
She's an icon. She's a legend.
But a lot of the fans still stay foaming at the mouth, picking at very specific scenes to find evidence that she will go mad and burn and mass murder in the books. The scenes that they popularly like to criticize are: 1. When Dany sacrifices Mirima's door to hatch dragons and the events leading up to it. 2. When she conquers Astapor, frees the Unsullied, and orders the deaths of all the slavers. And 3. The crucifixion of the slavers in Meereen. So let's look at this tweet. They say, "I can't sympathize with a child who would be a rapist like his father. If he were an alien, I would still recognize that his death was better. Even though I feel sorry for him, Miri just cut the evil at the root." So let's get up to speed. Daenerys sacrificed Miri because Miri gave Dany's baby Rhaego's soul to Drogo, killing him and making her have a major late stillbirth. A lot of people think this was a just thing to do because Rhaego was Drogo's child, and the Dosh Khaleen prophesied that baby Rhaego would be the stallion who mounts the world. Except no. What Miri did to Daenerys and Rhaego was not justice. She'd already gotten her revenge on the Dothraki and Drogo once he became sick and fell from his horse. Once Drogo was dying, it was over. The Khalasar would experience the same death and chaos that Drogo had wrought on Miri's village. I know some people think that Drogo invaded and enslaved Miri's village to raise an army for Dany's throne, but no, the Dothraki had been nomadic slavers for centuries, long before Daenerys had ever been born. If Drogo had never met Dany, he would have been doing the same thing. Mind you, Irri and Jiqui were Dothraki slaves. Now don't get it twisted. I understand Miri's fury. Miri said it was wrong of them to burn my temple. So I completely empathize with her rage at the Dothraki. They raped girls, they murdered their boys and their men. But what Miri did to Dany and Rhaego wasn't vengeance. It was hate. Miri said, "The stallion who mounts the world will burn no cities now." his Khalasar shall trample no nations to dust. And while a lot of the fandom thinks Miri was right to kill Rhaego in utero, Dany and Rhaego were not a threat to her anymore. Even before Drogo died, Jorah privately told Dany, "Princess, hear me. The Dothraki will not follow a suckling babe." Drogo's strength was what they bowed to, and only that. When he is gone, Jaqo and Pono and the other Khos will fight for his place, and this Khalasar will devour itself. The winner will want no more rivals. The boy will be taken from your breast the moment he is born. They will give him to the dogs. Both Rhaego, Dany, and the Khalasar's stability and safety rested on Drogo's dead fucking shoulders, and Miri made sure that was not going to happen. Of course, there's always going to be some detractors. Oh, Miri was just stopping Rhaego from getting revenge. But if she knew about the stallion who mounts the world prophecy, how did she not know about the Dothraki culture of following strength and killing their potential adversaries, even if they're defenseless infants? Miri took revenge on Dany solely because she carried Drogo's child. Her anger and hate blinded her to the fact that Dany was a child slave herself. Remember, Doreah also shares Valyrian ancestry like Dany. And when Miri forced Dany to stillbirth Rhaego, Dany was not able to protect Miri's fellow Lazarene, Eroe, who ended up being raped and murdered in the Khalasar power struggle. So why is Dany going to go mad for taking revenge on a woman who tore her helpless baby from her, the woman who tried to kill her with an 8-month stillbirth, who made it so Dany couldn't protect some of the women that she previously saved, and presumably rendered her infertile for the rest of her life? Dragons were the price for Miri's life, and Miri taught Daenerys herself how to resurrect them through her hate. Next, we have this tweet crying about the so-called slavers over age 12 who Dany commanded the newly freed Unsullied to kill. I mean, yeah, it's horrible what she went through, but that doesn't change the fact that what she did was horrific. Blood clots. Let me break this bullshit down. In the books, Dany told the Unsullied to harm no child under 12 once they were free to kill the masters of Astapor. Now, I could just go the easy road and say, well, Dany was 13 when she was forced to marry Drogo, so to her, 13 is an adult. But then her detractors would say, well, she owned Irri, Jiqui, and Doreah, and that's the point. And that's the difference. Dany was given handmaids as slaves in marriage, where she was also sold as a slave. They taught her how to speak her slaver husband's language, how to ride a horse, and how to have sex with him. These supposed murdered slave owner children in Astapor above age 13 had grown up as slave owners. They inherited and owned the people that their fathers owned. They weren't sold to grown men and given slaves to teach them how to adapt to their husband's culture. So why does this fandom think this is a sign of her madness? Isn't it funny that these same fans think Miri was right to rise up against Dany, a pregnant 14-year-old slaver, in their eyes, and kill her baby who wasn't even finished developing in the womb? But all of a sudden, the unnamed slave lord children who grew up as masters in the brutal Unsullied slave trade, who would be the same age as Dany and much older than Rhaego, are innocent, and it's terrible for the Unsullied to kill them, even though they would grow up to own these same Unsullied. Also, let's not forget that these slave master children don't exist. These Dany haters are getting themselves mad over children that no one fucking talks about and no one gives a fuck about. Honestly, what are we doing? There is no objection of the Unsullied killing some slave-owning teenager where Daenerys has to lament their death and question her actions. It's really telling that in order to demonize Daenerys, her haters are more worried about these hypothetical, unnamed, slave-owning teenagers more than the Unsullied fighting for their freedom. Moving on. This last tweet is about how Daenerys mobilized the slaves to rise up against Meereen and claim their freedom, and the subsequent crucifixion of the 163 masters of Meereen. This tweet says, and she leaves it up to them, referring to the Meereenese choosing which of their leaders will be executed after the fall of the city-state. Who's to say they weren't lying and gave up patsies? Also, bold of you to assume everyone in Slaver's Bay is guilty of participation in slavery, and no one may have just been in the wrong place, wrong time. I see this fucking stupid ass argument a lot. Daenerys didn't know which of the slave masters in Meereen were guilty of slavery. She didn't give them a trial. She didn't know who was involved in the massacre of the 163 slave children. Some of these Meereenese masters could have been against the children being disemboweled. First off, this thinking is from the show, because they had Show Hizdar describe his own slave-owning father as a benevolent master who was against the crucifixion of slave children. But this is not the case in the books. There was no slave master in Meereen who was against using slave children as mile markers to taunt Daenerys and her people. The reason that the Meereenese masters strung up and used disemboweled slave children as mile markers on the way to Meereen was because they did not think Dany would be able to conquer the city and free their slaves. It was a boastful and egotistical taunt to her liberation cause. But beyond that, it doesn't matter who was a potential innocent slave master in Meereen, because they were all complicit in slavery, which is a form of genocide. You can obviously see that since they happily sacrificed the lives and bodies of children as a joke. And this bullshit about how do you know if they weren't everyone in Slaver's Bay potentially not being guilty of participating in slavery? When Daenerys and the slaves take the city and round up all the Meereenese masters, they are all wearing tokars, a symbol of elite slave ownership. There was no mistaking that blatant status symbol. More so, when people say that Dany may have chosen the wrong leaders of the Meereenese, or she may have chosen potentially innocent masters, they're full of fucking shit, or they're fucking dumb. These Meereenese masters never believed that she would be able to breach their walls and conquer them. So when their own slaves turned against them and rose up to take them down, when were these Meereenese masters going to be able to choose false leaders to fool Dany? When in the chaos of the slave uprising were they going to predict that Dany was only going to pick 163 of their masters and let the others live? When did they form a solid counterinsurgency plan against her if they had no idea if she was even going to stay? She didn't even decide that yet. But most important of all, the Meereenese slaves turned against their masters. People always point fingers at Dany like she was the singular person who overthrew all these slave regimes herself. The freed slaves were the ones who struck off their own chains, captured the pyramids, and rounded up the remaining masters. So even though Dany didn't know which master was more prominent or more powerful, these fans are saying that the slaves were too stupid to know which of the people who owned, mutilated, raped, and murdered them were. This is why this argument is such a piece of shit. Dany is not a sole entity. She is moving with hundreds of thousands of people who support her. When you're saying Dany didn't know this or Dany didn't know that, she literally has advisors who were slaves in the very city she conquered. So even if she didn't know, the people who support her would. But of course, Dany aunties don't see the slaves she freed as human. They don't see them as people with memories and grievances and anger toward the ones who owned them. These haters don't even give a fuck that many of the 163 executed children would have been related to the remaining Meereenese slaves. The people who hate Daenerys have to dehumanize her supporters, the freedmen and their experience under slavery, in order to demonize her. These critics have to throw out their empathy and basic understanding of human rights to prove that Dany will be the biggest violator of human rights. They're basically saying that the slaves are criminals for defending themselves. Stupid. One of my Twitter mutuals said something really astute that I completely echo. You see this racist, paternalistic bullshit when people talk about the Unsullied not knowing who the slavers were and indiscriminately killing Astapori non-slave owner civilians, which don't exist in that society George R.R. Martin created. The Unsullied and enslaved people in general would know exactly who was trafficking, torturing, and murdering them. To act like they were just cluelessly doing whatever Dany told them and not exacting justice on their abusers is so disingenuous and wrong. But that's the Asoyaf fandom in a nutshell. And this is what I talk about regarding both Rhaenyra and Daenerys. These fans refuse to acknowledge how Dany and Rhaenyra positively impact the world they were developed in. They are so quick to point fingers, cast blame, doubt, and accusations when it's Dany and Rhaenyra exercising power, especially violent or revolutionary power. A lot of the audience is quick to criminalize them and moralize over them. Daenerys and Rhaenyra are not afforded the benefit of the doubt or even the context of the world building and circumstances that lead to their decision making. And even though Rhaenyra and Dany are developed in the same world, these same criticisms are never levied against the other characters who operate in George R. R. Martin's story. Rhaenyra is wrong for fighting for her crown. According to the fans, she is the reason for so much death, devastation, and destruction from war. Her being the first queen ever would not be a major progressive leap for her continent, and she should give up the crown the moment she's in power. But Robb Stark is fine to be the king in the north because his daddy got jumped. Stannis Baratheon is the rightful heir, even though he burns people alive and marches them to their death in the icy winter. Rhaenyra's own brother Aegon is fine to be king. He's fine to steal the crown and maintain the monarchy, even though he's a rapist who's fathered illegitimate children on numerous poor women. That's okay. Nobody has to break the system but Rhaenyra. Nobody has to pay for the crime of having consensual sex but Rhaenyra. It doesn't matter that she's got all the women fighting for her and the majority of the continent on her side. Rhaenyra's existence don't mean shit, and she's the problem. Then you got Daenerys. Daenerys, who shouldn't have survived slavery under her adult husband, shouldn't have gotten revenge on the woman who tried to tear her body wide open and killed her baby. Dany can't free slaves because think of the poor young slave owners. But also, she can't kill the slaves because think of the poor adult slave owners. And Dany probably chose the wrong ones anyway. Forget about the fact that she empowered the slaves to defeat the masters and free themselves. Dany alone is the problem. The truth is, though, all of these criticisms against Daenerys and Rhaenyra stem from the fact that they were written as women. They were written as women in power. They were written as women whose power challenges and uproots oppressive, restrictive systems. That's why they're not given the benefit of the doubt. They gotta jump through insane hoops. Nothing that they stand for or accomplish is ever good. And they're subjected to hypocritical double standards by a lot of the general audience and even the showrunners. That's why I don't believe a fucking word these so-called fans say when they try to act like Dany and Rhaenyra are the devils in the Asoyaf universe. Most of these arguments they make can be dismantled by a paragraph from one of the books. And I know they won't do it, but they should really look at why they need to justify homophobia, slut-shaming, misogyny, corrective rape, and slavery apologia in order to feel good about their hatred for a mother who's experienced overt sexism all her life and a fictional 15-year-old girl. But those are just my sane opinions as I explore storytelling here on Earth. I love fiction in all its forms. And unlike AI, the real stories we tell and engage in are a reflection of who we are as people. So keep writing, keep creating real art, keep talking about the stories that you love. If you want genuine creative storytelling from me, get deliberate at alorascott.com. Like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And I will see y'all again soon. Thank you. Later.